in response to the shock of truly encountering the other. That, we come into the world in this kind of infantile, oceanic oneness. And therefore, there is no language. There is no need to speak, because there is only the one in blissful or not blissful, but in communion with itself. It is only upon this shock, this universe-upsetting apprehension that there is a limit to me, and there is an other. The other brings food, the other brings warmth, the other goes away, and the warmth and the food go away. And I have to vocalize, I have to cry out. Or I'm cute, I giggle, or when I laugh, the other comes back. This shock happens to each person before we understand that there's such a thing called language. It's the reason that we generate the thing called language. It's the reason that we extrude a self, that we begin to differentiate, that we begin to have a personality. So this ontic shock happens prior to conscious recollection, when there are no words. And that, for Levinas, is the foundation of the human. And he says that this structure is repeated in all consciousness throughout life. That internally there is a kind of seamless internal colloquy going on, but the encounter with the other person interrupts all that immanence, descends on me from outside with the force of revelation. That is how we perceive revelation, from the outside. It's the proof. The other actual human being is what demonstrates to me in my bones, beyond my conscious reason, that I don't make the world. That there are these whole other universes behind all of your eyes. As soon as I quit this monologue and we start to have a conversation, I'm going to lose control. Because I have no idea what any of you is going to say. I don't make it up. So the act of relating, of relationship, and in particular the act of speech, is for Levinas what defines the human. And it's what retroactively allows us to understand the revelation with God. What happens at Sinai is the big eruption into being from outside of this word, of this truth, of relationship. So, for Levinas, it's very important in his criticism of this Western tendency to always futilely to try to totalize, to try to domesticate into the same, that Jewish knowledge is necessarily multiple and multivocal. There is never a final answer, but a series of contentions in the particular case. And we're going to look at some of those. That what reality is made of is not only whatever the facts of the matter may be, however we might arrive at truth claims about what the facts of the matter may be, but also everybody's interiority, everybody's consciousness of it. All of that together is what makes up reality. And he emphasized that each person is a unique event in being, that each human is not an example of a genus, not one of a species, but a unique, never to be repeated, irreplaceable miracle, an eruption into being. So, key terms, the other human being, or the big other, God, comes upon me. It's different from Buber's I-thou relationship, which, first of all, for Buber, is this occasional happy accident, and is a moment of pure reciprocity, that moment in which people look into one another's eyes and there are suddenly no words for the immensity of that encounter. And the other is really truly perceived in all his or her ineffability. And for Buber, those are moments of grace. They don't last, but they can inform the rest of our lives. For Levinas, it's not quite that nice. For him, if we're really awake, if we're sensitive to what it is to be human, the other comes upon me as the bearer of an undeclinable, very uncomfortable demand. The other is the widow and the orphan and the stranger, who comes upon me with her disruptive vulnerability and interrupts my naive exercise of freedom, so that I'm not happy in my own skin. My simple delight in the good soup, the warm sun, is interrupted by the other's potential hunger. And I'm obliged to share. I don't just decide that I feel like it. On the other hand, it is the other who founds my freedom, because only a free being can really take on that obligation. And again, we see this in the history of the Jesus of people, that in order to merit the dignity of taking on the obligation that we received at Sinai, we had to be free. And the true exercise of that freedom, the true underwriting of it, was when, as a people, we decided to say yes to this obligation with God. So that also informs Levinas' view of society, that in a free society, in a democracy, what really founds our freedom is our irremissible obligation as members of a polity to one another. Obviously, I've indicated thinkers with whom Levinas is very connected. Huge influences on Levinas were Franz Rosenzweig and Martin Buber, who preceded him, but who were also part of the same movement of highly educated, philosophically oriented Western Jews who found an inadequacy in their training and discovered that there was this whole other way to know that was available to us in Judaism. And in particular, the way of knowing that in which all interlocutors are not interchangeable, in which, when we're going to say, we're going to look at a Talmudic argument, in which every arguer is mentioned by name, in which minority opinions are recorded, in which there is never a final answer. There is always one more commentary and one more interpretation. Levinas continues to grow in influence. He's much, much more important now than when he lived. He was a huge influence on Jacques Derrida and the deconstructionists, and you can see why. Nowadays, it's almost a given that we don't all come into the world to be the same. That there is actually a kind of wealth of understanding in multiple perspectives. But even in high modernism, if you'll remember, especially before the war, there was this fantasy that we could actually arrive at a universal vocabulary of human experience. An example in painting, if you look at abstract expressionism, there really was this ambition that we could create a vocabulary of color and form such that the deepest human emotions could be abstracted in a way that would touch any viewer from any culture. The new criticism in literature said, don't look at the writer's autobiography. The good writing is that which stands the test of time and is going to speak to readers in the same way throughout the ages. It's because of the willingness to impose absolutes that the Nazis evinced that this whole project really came into question. And deconstructionism evolved as a corrective to this hunger for absolutes, to this hierarchy of the true and the false, the healthy and the degenerate, that reached its apotheosis in Nazism. So, therefore, in this age of globalization, in this age when people are starting to ask, well, what if we really try to impose universal norms, what is lost? People like Levinas are increasingly being appreciated also because what he does not advocate is a reaction. He does not say we should, the way to combat this totalization is we all go back to our unique tribal essences. Precisely not. I mean, he is mercilessly critical of, for example, Martin Heidegger's idealization of pre-Socratic Greeks and the bucolic spirit, partly because he saw what uses the Nazis made of it, but also because he really did not believe in this metaphysics of blood and soil, of essentialized nationalized identities, of essentialized divisions between native and stranger. Rather, he believed in the particular human being, naked to the appeal of every other human being. That doesn't mean he didn't believe that we should have states. He did believe we should have laws. But the understanding is that these are always provisional and that the justice needs to serve the relationship, not the other way around. That the reason we have laws in countries is because it's not just me and you. It's he and she and they. There are third and fourth parties and competing claims that have to be adjudicated. But he believed that the systems that are the most just are those which bring forth as many voices as possible, that in which the minority opinion is heard, in which justice is decided in the particular case, and not only on the basis of grand prescriptions. So we're going to get into some particular texts. We're going to do one small text from Levinas and then some Jewish texts.